Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Talking Statamic. I'm your host, Michael LaRoy. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by John Koster. You might recognize John's name attached to a bunch of different Statamic add-ons and different Laravel open source projects. So I'll just hand it right over to John and let him introduce himself to all of you who are watching and listening. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Michael. As I said, I'm John Koster, and I just spend way too much time thinking about Laravel and Statamic and Blade, Antlers, just all the things.
Well, what got you interested in this world in the first place? I mean, you've got a bunch of pretty significant contributions to both of those things, especially, I mean, we can get into some of those things as we go, but I mean, the whole Antlers parser templating thing is largely something that you spearheaded. Is that right?
Yeah, so to start that, I was working on my own personal website all the way back. It was like Statamic 2.10. And I was
Okay.
trying to get something to work with the template, and it was just needlessly difficult. I think I was trying to chain two conditions together in the templating
Mm-hmm.
language. I just couldn't get it to work. And, the sensible approach at the time would be like just create a tag, spend 5 minutes and move on with your day. And
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't let it go. So then I spent all the way from Statamic 2.10 to 3.4, however long that was. I think it was about a year just obsessively working on re-engineering, reverse engineering all the behaviors. And that's how the new Antlers came about.
So what was it like before then? Was it even called Antlers, or was that something that was birthed out of this process?
No, it was Antlers. So the modern Antlers looks and feels a lot like it did back then. Like the
Okay.
ergonomics and the style of the language hasn't changed. It's just smoothed out a lot of the foot guns that you'd run into. Um,
Okay.
and even now, there's foot guns like with scoping and like how you do certain things. But back then, it's like, well, I could reinvent the language, but then it's not Antlers. So,
Right.
and if there's a certain behavior where you could question, arguably say, like, yeah, that's a bug. But if it's a bug that
Mm-hmm.
everybody's been relying on for 5 years or whatever it's been, it's not really a bug.
Sure. Well, where do you get your inspiration for how to work with this sort of stuff? I remember talking with you at Laracon last year in Denver. We're hanging out at one of the after hours parties, and you were just like spitballing ideas about we could do this with Antlers and we can do that with Antlers. Where does that kind of stuff come from?
It's just, like I've kind of always been fascinated with languages in general, but like templating languages are like an interesting intersection. Because like we could spend all day building like these fantastic backends, and if you're not building like an API returning just a JSON XML or whatever it is, like that templated language is like that's how you go from like your backend and present that to the front end to the user, and that's always just been interesting to me,
Hmm.
like that specific narrow domain,
Yeah, really cool.
and I don't know, it's it's not I don't think it's necessarily healthy to think about it as much as I do. And so I think, if you think about like Antlers, like there's a charm to it in the way it works, especially how closely tied to like static data model is, right? Where you can get away with, two or three lines where even if you transferred it directly to like Blade and Statman, it'd be like maybe 15, 20 lines, just a boilerplate code. So like that's one of those areas where you look at that and like that's interesting to me.
Mm.
Just hiding all the complexity behind the scenes and being reasonably performant at the same time. So like templating language, you get into this area of there's so many problems you have to try and solve at the same time.
Yeah. If you're building a website with Statamic, do you have a preference of using Antlers or Blade, or does it sort of all come out in the wash?
I don't have a hard preference anymore. If you were looking at it, late Statamic 3 life cycle, Statamic 4, and even 5, I would probably tell people if you want the smoothest developer experience, stick with Antlers and then pull Blade in, because everything is just Laravel views at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it all interoperates nicely. But nowadays, like we've closed the gap with Blade and Statamic specifically so far. Like there's really, it's just whichever on the project. If I was going to do a lot with Livewire, I'd probably go with Blade,
Okay.
just so you're not context switching as much. But that's another area I've been looking into is how much of Livewire can I pull into the Atlas experience
Mm.
closer to core and just kind of have it work.
Okay.
with all the painful awfulness that comes with trying to emulate a lot of the blade behaviors on top of antlers.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just to back up to one thing you said just there a second ago. You were saying that you've narrowed the gap between antlers and blade pretty substantially. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what are we talking about here?
I think the first big part of that initiative was um, so in blade when you're working with static now you can it looks like you're working with typical blade components, but you can use any antlers tag. It's just got like the little S dash syntax, and then like, oh, you pull in your collection, you do your nav tag, whatever. And we've a lot of work on the back end to make it feel as seamless as possible. So if you're going from antlers to blade, you arguably get a better syntax
Mm.
for working with the core tags, which we do offer now in antlers, but that was the big push for that. And then recently, we've been working on improving like the DX and how you get values, how the augmentation works, just iron out a lot of the little pain points.
Well, how much of that came out of the new release of Statamic that came out a few weeks ago, version 6? Because there's a bunch of template upgrades there where we have like the new tag
Mm-hmm.
syntax and that kind of thing.
Yep. So this, we actually brought the blade syntax that I was talking about back to antlers. So we kind
Mm.
of like went full circle. We took the antlers tags, ported them to blade. Thought, wow, the developer experience of using those is really great. Let's bring those back to antlers. And then on top of that, we did a lot of work of bringing blade components themselves into the antlers runtime. So you can call blade components directly from antlers, vice versa. And we do a bunch of work to make sure all the stuff on the back, like in Laravel's view factories, like set up correctly. So yeah, blade components think they're running on blade. You can author blade components with antlers, which is kind of fun. There's limited support now for blade directives in antlers, if you know where to look. So a lot of interesting movement.
I'm curious a little bit about some of your add-ons. If I was looking at the marketplace, you've got about half a dozen or more add-ons in there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more in the works, or do you want to talk about any of these that are like exciting for you that you want to highlight for us?
I don't think I got any land coming up. My surface area of responsibilities is already a little large. So
Yeah.
I've been a lot more careful lately about what I add on to it, especially with some other projects coming up. I think still Meerkat is my oldest add-on. It's still my favorite. I wish I had more time to put into it, and I got some updates planned for that, but just always so many things to do.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
Outside of that, I think the relationships add-on is probably um, the most widely used, I would think.
Mm.
Yeah, and so if you don't know the people listening, that's where like you can link like relationships like one to many, many to one. Define it with PHP, and it like syncs up stuff between your entries automatically. I think that would probably be the most widely used.
What do you think? What's a typical use case for something like that? Is it like if you're wanting to use, say, like a collection as in place of a taxonomy, for example?
I've seen people use it for that. I've I've also the widest use case that I've seen is people like linking stuff, like kind of like cheating performance. So like if you wanted to relate like your books to an author, and the add-on just like syncs and manages that all for you. So it's
Mm.
like right on the target entry. So you're not doing extra queries. Um, I've seen it. It's just crazy what people do with it, and that's something I've been putting a lot of thought in. I'm not a big fan of the way it does syncing in the background.
Okay.
That feels a little bit goopy if you think about it. So that's another area that I've been brainstorming is like, how can I make it so that that add-on doesn't need to exist like directly with the Statamic core
Yeah.
is one thing that I've been kind of interested in recently. So that's a bit exploring like pivot tables
Okay.
as an item within Statamic, like mounting a collection behind the scenes, linking two collections
Mm.
together, arbitrary data on the joins, stuff like that.
You also mentioned some of the other responsibilities that you carry. There's a lot on your plate uh, with when it comes to the Statamic project. What are some of the other things that you're working on these days?
Statamic specifically,
Yeah.
I just kind of hunkered in the background like doing like long-term like research and development stuff that probably might not see the light of day, or like you get one or two good ideas that do see the light of day.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was exploring recently, like working on some of that library stuff, and like I had like a little aha moment
Mm.
of being able to reliably inject markers into the output of antlers. So, and what I mean by that is like if you're like looping over something in the background, if you looked at the view source, you would see like two HTML comments, like delineating like, okay, here's the start, here's the end of the block.
Mm-hmm.
And then found a way to reliably do that, which also gets tricky because you could have an antlers tag inside like the attribute content of an HTML tag. You don't want to check markers there. And the antlers parser itself isn't an HTML parser. So things get a little bit tricky. But one of the things I was able to do that with that and like this behind the scenes like research and development is like if you're clicking around in like live preview, it would like scroll to match the field you're active in. Like it would map the content to the control panel. So if you're in live preview, it would automatically scroll.
Mm.
And I've pushed it quite a bit further. And this isn't a promise of any feature development or features that are coming to Static, but we pushed it pretty far into some back end projects of like being able to like control command click on a field on the front end and like it brings up the control panel fields on your front end so you can edit your content directly. It's just like all from a stupid little HTML content that you inject into the page. So it's like little stuff like that, right? Like you spend like 9 months figuring out how to do something reliably, then like watershed moment and everything else follows. So that's kind of where I get stuck is in the background.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds pretty fun
And
though.
then helping. It can be.
How closely do you work with the core team when it comes to those things, or are you kind of off on your own world when it comes to that?
It depends. Stuff like that I'm usually off on my own because there's there's no real business need for it until you can present a business need for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like but every now and then they'll be like, hey, would you mind working on this? Like, sure.
Right on.
So it kind of ebbs and flows.
Can we talk a little bit about some of the books? I'm just on your website and I've noticed that you published a few books on there, and specifically there's one about antlers, but you've got a couple other things there about Laravel and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the books that you've written?
Yeah, so I did see if I can go back here without the camera freaking out. But I think the big ones, would be like the Antlers book that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, that one was just I had come off like the high of like working on like the big Antlers migration and getting everything to work, and then like you just have so many thoughts in your brain, so like just want to dump all the remaining things somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where the Antlers books come from. But the Laravel stuff is just you spend so much time in it, and I just like to create and like put stuff somewhere. If I don't, I'll explode, like mentally go insane. So that's where like all the Laravel books come from. The first couple were just me effectively taking notes for myself,
Yep.
and then after a certain point, we're like, wow, you're sitting on 700 pages of notes. Let's collect them together into a book. And at the time, like the documentation for Laravel has gotten so much better.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculously good over the years. But like back in like Laravel 4, early 5 days, like there was quite a few gaps that they closed. And that's kind of where those notes and those book projects came from. And nowadays, I don't think there's a need for that style of reference book compared to the official documentation. And then my last major book project, besides the Antlers one, was the Advanced PHP Strings, which is how far can you like take string manipulation, like all the weird stuff that you don't normally think about if you're just quote a front end like web developer, like
Mm-hmm.
encodings, like how would you implement like a function to uppercase a string?
Okay.
What does that look like behind the scenes? Like just stuff like that, and then you of course then you package it up. You're like, oh, we're going to approach it from the Laravel string helpers vantage point and make it somewhat approachable as much as you can.
Yeah. Well, when you've got hundreds of pages of stuff to draw from, I imagine there's going to be some gems in there like that. Um, Specifically for the Antlers book, I mean, for those of you who aren't watching on video, you're just listening, it's a pretty thick looking book. There's probably a lot of stuff in there that maybe is not on the documentation. Are there any sort of Antlers or even Laravel things in some of these books that might not be appearance to your average Statamic or Laravel developer? That like these are like kind of fun things that would be great if everybody knew.
Um, in the first couple books, for Laravel specifically, maybe at the time there was, but like it's so widely covered at this point. With the Antlers book, there's a few things in there, like hidden syntax that you might not know about,
Mm-hmm.
like how to. There's a syntax in Antlers to create an array, a short, like an associative array, but it looks like a CSV
Okay.
file inline in your Antlers. So like you cut out like all the boilerplate syntax of like open bracket, parenthesis, quotes. Here's the name, equal sign, greater. It cuts out all of that stuff away. So there's hidden syntax like that. There's ways to do like the equivalent of PHP's variable variables.
Okay.
There's ways to do that in Atlas. There's a syntax for like inline evaluation that only works inside template context. Like there's a bunch of little things. But if you kind of need to reach for those, you probably should be rethinking what you're doing from a front end
Okay.
perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why some of the stuff is kind of like not documented and relegated to like resources like the books.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're really adventurous going through the test suite. But there's quite a bit it can do that probably shouldn't do.
Well, that's what I remember from our conversation back at Laracon. It's like there's so much stuff that's in there. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong. The way that I remember it was like Antlers can do all these things that actually Blade can't do.
Yeah, and I think that's just a side effect of like how closely tied to the data model it is.
Okay.
And then from a syntax perspective, you know, there's a lot of syntax to Antlers compared to Blade. Because Blade, you primarily got your interpolations like your echoes with the curly brackets and then your directive control structures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of it, which there's beauty in the simplicity of that. Versus like when we designed the new version of Antlers, it's like, well, what if we had like an SQL-ish syntax for working with collections? So like you have your variable and then you type the where keyword. So, or if you're familiar with like LINQ and C sharp, it's dangerously close to that. And it kind of reads like destructured like eloquent methods, which is kind of nice, but a lot of that was just let's see if we could.
Yeah. Why not? Right.
Yeah. And two, like if you look at like Blade, which compiles down to PHP, and then like Antlers runs on its virtual machine in the background. So if you really wanted to, you could write another parser and then just emit effectively the Antlers equivalent of bytecode and have another templated language running on top of Antlers. Totally possible.
Man. So it's actually pretty versatile at the end of the day.
Yep. And that's how I'm getting with some of the recent stuff we're doing with like Statamic 6 with like the directives. That's pretty much what we've done is like we wrote a parser that looks for Blade directives, translates it to the correct stuff that runs, and the Antlers language itself didn't really change at all to support that.
Hmm. Oh, I was going to ask you about your aha moment that you tweeted about a couple weeks ago. Was that the one that you were talking about with Livewire?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then get in the comments and then to work and because if you look at Antlers as a language, like where do you go from here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like feature wise, it's pretty locked down. And you don't want to like make change just for change's sake. And I've got some improvements to make. Like there's some like long-standing annoyances with like how scope you can accidentally capture scope and override variables if you do things in just the right way with like the current partials, right? And like, well, I could fix that. It's technically a bug, but if I fix that, I'm going to break a lot of stuff, right? So like introducing in the future, like an include variant of partials that doesn't have that issue. So like from a feature standpoint, there's not a lot you can really do going forward. So I've been really, really kind of obsessed with like not evolving the language, but like how can we take like that front end user experience, like if you're signed to the control panel and like bridge that gap. Can we blur the lines between your front end and the control panel experience? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I've been putting a lot of my brain power
Okay. Interesting.
with Antlers specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where something like that might end up because I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, well, WordPress started doing this a few years ago with their whole like block editor idea, where you just sort of
Yep.
click into the thing and you're typing there, which is actually a pretty nice experience when it's done well.
Yeah. The challenge with Statamic for something like that is to make it feel good is you'd want it to like still be like the super discrete blueprint field set content modeling experience,
Hmm.
and then instead of make it so flexible with like custom field types, like you kind of want that all to just work. So you don't want to get into a situation where like if you as the field type developer, you don't necessarily, if you don't have to, like don't force people to create a version of their field type that works the control panel, and then here's how you make it for the front end,
Yeah.
right? So like a lot of thought and experimentation in getting that to work in some private development branches. So like any custom field type would just like naturally flow into the front end, and there's a lot of like black magic that's going on.
Mhm.
So
I think that kind of magic is probably a good thing to abstract away, um,
mm,
especially for especially for your average developer who maybe doesn't feel comfortable having like developing their own field types or that sort of thing. And my experience with WordPress and other developers will probably relate to this a little bit. Having to create a separate template or a different rendering function if it's React, for example, to output
mm-hmm.
what's going to show up in the control panel versus what's on the front end. There's a lot more overhead that can come with something like that, and then how do you tie it into the other things in the control panel? I can see how that could be really complicated.
Yeah, and especially with like front ends, like who knows what environment you're going to be in? Is it Vue.js?
Yeah.
Is it React? You know, what's the runtime look like? Are we going back? Is it a jQuery with Knockout.js? Who knows? It's like there's there's so much variance on that. Like, and that's part of why I think my brain just like latched onto it. Is like this is an awful problem that you shouldn't spend so much time thinking about, and that's kind of why I'm attracted to it.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of front end frameworks, how much of a deep dive have you done into Vue 3 now that that's part of Static 6 in core?
Oh boy, I was on the bandwagon of like, oh, they're taking away the options
Yeah.
API, and on the like, oh, it was almost perfect, and why I have to learn this like weird syntax? But no, I love composition API. Like, I much prefer it now
Oh, really? Okay.
that I actually sat down. Yeah, it's weird. Like, I don't know exactly know when, but there was just a moment where I was just like, this is nice.
Mm.
And I think I had the same kind of like feeling. You know, if you look even with like Livewire and Bolt, like I had that kind of like initial experience with that too. But no, I do prefer like the composition style APIs nowadays.
How has that changed, or has it changed your approach to building stuff?
I think the biggest impact is with the like options API, you could there was like affordances where like you could it was easier to like reference components like up the tree,
Mhm.
and so you could more easily like break the boundaries, like start doing stuff you probably shouldn't be doing. With composition API, like I found myself having to like sit down and think through it a little bit more. So you have like cleaner boundaries across things and stuff like that.
Mm.
I think it would probably be the largest consequence of it in my own personal development.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good result if it's going to end up with cleaner code and less dangerous things going on.
Yeah, because with me, like I will find a way to abuse any tool, and
Right on, right on. Well, before we wrap up, I'm curious. One of the things I love to ask my guests for this season is like, what sort of like hot takes or controversial or unpopular opinions do you have, especially when it comes to what we're talking about?
I think probably my most surprising hot take would be that people put too much crap in their front end templates. They
Hmm.
should move some of the complexity back into the controllers, or in the context of Statamic. A lot more things need to be in tags, um, especially with like if you look at like how easy it is to do stuff in line with like Blade, or even now with like Antlers nowadays. It's like it can be really tempting to just like, oh, I'll just chuck this gigantic piece of code into the template and move on. It's just like I think people should do less of that.
Hmm. Do you have, is there a specific example in mind that you're thinking of?
And the Antlers role, I see like a lot of people will do like a gigantic loop and construct like JSON objects
Oh,
using
interesting. Yeah.
Antlers, like outputting like the curly brackets and the JSON structure using Antlers. It's like, and like great that you can do that. I'm like happy for you, but like just move it to a tag and then just like return JSON encode.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been a much wiser use of your time.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today. It's been fun talking about this stuff. It's nice that you're able to stop by on our humble little show here. So that's a wrap. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player or over on YouTube if you'd like to watch the show, and leave us a review. You can follow us on X at Talking Statamic, and we're also on Blue Sky. And you can join the mailing list at talkingstatamic.com. And just a reminder, you can get my starter kit, Cascadia, on the Statamic Marketplace. It's on sale with a coupon, which you can also find in the show notes. And there's a link there as well for that. So thanks for watching and listening. Catch you next time. And roll the credits.